Indiana football won a national championship. So what does it mean for Nebraska in football and in basketball?
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and thanks for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the number one sports cat podcast network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode, NFL playoff mode. Every game during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com to get started.
All right, welcome on a Wednesday. Connor Happer here from 1620 The Zone. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Plenty to react to, including the almost official hiring away of Mike Ekeler to USC. I mean, it's
left is the press release.
All that's left is the press release. So I guess it's not official until it's official, but we stepped closer to that with a report out of CBS Sports on Tuesday that the deal is done with Mike Ekeler and USC. So we'll talk about that throughout the podcast. That would be your news of the day. But your news that we haven't got a chance to react to on this podcast yet was what you mentioned there at the top, Mitch. Indiana football won an undefeated national championship and beat many, many big dogs on the path to doing so. And one of the things that happens after, especially an unusual team wins a national championship is we do around here. We like to transport that thought back to Nebraska. What does it mean for Nebraska? Does it inspire any hope for Nebraska? I mean, I think there's a lot of different angles to this. But I don't know. I start this way. I feel like it should inspire hope for literally any other, middling or bottom program in the country that they can do, not necessarily what Indiana did, go undefeated and win a national championship, but at least find their path to success, right?
Yeah, if you've got the right kind of focus, the right kind of leadership, the right vision, the right pieces that come together, then I think Indiana showed that in this era of college football, anything is possible. More so than the world that we lived in 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago even. I don't think this could have happened in certain eras of the sport. Curt Cignetti could have been Curt Cignetti and his colorful, fun self in a different era of college football, but it took some of the newness, some of the transportability of players in the sport in order to make this thing come together the way it did. But let's just take a moment to actually stand back and recognize what Indiana did, not just on Monday night and defeating Miami on Miami's home field 27-21. Nebraska football knows all about how difficult it is to beat the Canes on their own home field in the postseason. And Indiana did it in the first opportunity in just the second year as a nationally relevant program. This is something that took Tom Osborne 20 years to do. And I think that is a microcosm of where college football is today compared to where college football was a generation or two ago, in that what took 20 years to build now takes 2 in an instance like this. It's not quite that simple, right? But it's remarkable. It was remarkable to watch it. It was one of the most, when it was all done, I don't know that I felt this way about Indiana all the way through, but when it was all done and they were on the stage hoisting the trophy and Fernando Mendoza leaked out an F-bomb, which was the big surprise of the night. Mm-hmm. I just thought, I'm glad that I got to see this because it's just one of the more amazing stories that we've witnessed definitely in college football. I think you could probably come up with some things in other college sports. I don't want to go hyperbolic here and say no one in college sports has ever done anything like this, because there have been amazing Cinderella stories. But in college football, it's not the sport for Cinderellas, and especially not in the college football playoff era, and especially not in the 12-team college football playoff era, because of how many great teams you have to beat to reach the mountaintop.
Yeah, I mean, and they knocked them all off too. I mean, they beat Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game. They crushed Alabama. They crushed Oregon, who were, that's top 10 teams all season long. And then, beat Miami, a really talented team, in the national championship game. I think, like you could look at it from a variety of different angles. There's definitely been this sort of like reset or like flattening of the sport and all that stuff. But I think the thing that stuck out to me, like you said, when they were on the podium on Monday night, was the feeling that was the right team, and so the thought of Cinderella and whatever you think about Cinderellas, you think about the NCAA basketball tournament where a team makes a run deep into the tournament and you're like, wow, how'd St. Peter's get there, or how'd George Mason get to the Final Four or something like that. This was the best team in college football all year long, and it's also the losingest program in college football history. They hadn't won a bowl game in 60 years, prior to a month ago,
2 weeks ago. Right.
It's amazing.
I'm a little bit sad, and this is a product again of the way the sport works, where you have these free agent quarterbacks who finish their career and reach the peak of their career in a spot where it's just it's a quick shooting star. Like I wish we could get more of Fernando Mendoza. I want more. I want more of the Fernando Mendoza story. And it's not in any way new in this sport to see a great player with remaining eligibility go to the NFL. That's not what I mean. And he's going to go be the number one pick, and we'll still see him, but it's not going to be the same, because when you're playing for the Las Vegas Raiders, like, it's not a story about your mom and your dad and your family who were there. Like, Fernando's going to move on and be an adult, and it'll be about that. And it's just not going to have this. It's not going to be as captivating. Like, we hardly got to know him. It was really just the last few weeks of the 25 season. And that's sad, because it's one of the more endearing and heartwarming stories that college football has given us in a long time. The story of his mom with MS and how he came to win the championship in his hometown, like 2 miles from where he grew up, and his dad played with Mario Cristobal. And there's so many more layers of the Mendoza story probably to pull back and to just be able to soak in that well, we're going to have to give up now. That's this part of the sacrifice with college football the way it is today. Everything happens so fast, and by the time somebody becomes a star, they're just about done.
Yeah, and then, haven't even touched on the Cignetti part of it, where, he takes a chance on himself and says, sure, I'm going to go. I want to be a head coach because I think I know how to do it, and I think I can do it really well. And so he goes and, from a job at Alabama to a pay cut as the head coach at Elon, and then James Madison, and wins all the way through, short period of time, and then takes the job at Indiana, what everybody thought was, like a death trap of a job. And he goes there and goes 27-2 in a national championship in his first year, 2 college football playoff appearances. I mean, it is the greatest coaching job that any of us have ever seen. And that doesn't, I'm not saying that to disparage anybody else in the sport and the greats of the sport or whatever, but there can't be a better one. There cannot be a better one.
No, and he was an interviewer's dream with Reese Davis on the stage Monday night, when he didn't even have to get asked the question. And I think Cignetti posed the question himself about whether he ever could I ever have seen myself in this situation? Well, probably not. When I was waxing the staff dining table at IUP on Thanksgiving weekend I mean, it was, you could see like Reese Davis's eyes just light up. Like I couldn't have posed the question better for you, Sigs, than you just did for yourself right there. So that's that's our thought on Indiana, and we'll mention too that Nebraska, to bring this back to Nebraska was in on the ground level somewhat of seeing this thing blow up when the Huskers went to Bloomington. I was on that trip last year in October, or 2 years ago in October of 2024, and Indiana had started 5-0, and so had Nebraska. And most of the experts in college football thought Nebraska would probably be the team to go in there and put Indiana in its place. And if not Nebraska, then certainly Michigan a few weeks later, or somebody else, Michigan State, one of these middle of the road. Not that Michigan was middle of the road, but it kind of was last year.
Yeah, they weren't very good. Yeah,
Big Ten teams was going to give it to the Hoosiers, and Indiana thumped Nebraska 56-7, and people's eyes perked up, and they didn't beat a ranked team. Indiana didn't beat a ranked team last year. Ohio State blew out the Hoosiers in November. Notre Dame took care of them in the first round of the CFP, but that set the stage. And then this year, Indiana just blew everyone's expectations all the way out of the water.
Yeah, that Nebraska game last year. I mean, that was when Gus Johnson he delivered the line of Indiana, you got a football team. Indiana, you got a football team now. And it was,
and I think the people in Bloomington were just figuring that out too. It was kind of a sleepy day even with Big Noon there. It wasn't like, you didn't get the sense that you were watching a national championship contender.
No, at the time, I mean, we were wondering what happened to Nebraska, and they certainly made their fair share of mistakes in that game. But
that was just what Indiana did to teams over the last both
aged terrifically. It's about as good as a 56-7 loss as aged, I suppose.
Yeah. Let's take a break. We'll stop talking about Indiana in that way, and we'll bring it to Nebraska. Both Nebraska football and Nebraska basketball, what they should make of this, what they can take from this, what it can mean for them. That's after this.
But first, the NFL playoffs are here, and FanDuel is here to help. They're giving you all the more ways to get on the action every single game day of the playoffs right now. Every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users can get a profit boost waiting for you in the app. So take a look at championship weekend this weekend, or even the upcoming big one, the big one. You could take a look there, ride the favorite if you want to, go with the underdog if you want to, take a look at anytime touchdown scores, build yourself a same game parlay. We have 3 NFL games left this season, so you got to get in on this action right now. Then there's profit boosts going on these game days, so you can go after even bigger winnings. So FanDuel is going to have you covered there. It is the best place to get in on the action all playoff long. Head to FanDuel.com to get your NFL playoff profit boosts every game day.
Thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen of the day, and thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Mitch Sherman, Connor Happer, back with you on this Wednesday episode of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. All right, let's ask the question. What does this dominance from the Indiana Hoosiers football team mean for Nebraska? What should Nebraska football make of this? Does it mean anything at all for Nebraska football, which is laboring to take one small step at a time, while the Hoosiers, with few of the advantages that Nebraska believes it has, just waltzes in and makes it all look, I wouldn't say easy, but very attainable?
Yeah. It's not easy, what they've been able to do, but certainly they make it look that way. I just think my big takeaway from Indiana is just, I've said it a million times on this show and others, like they just execute. And so you look at their talent and you're like, wow, there's nothing to write home about. Nebraska probably has better talent on their roster right now. And you're like, wow, is that really true? It could, I mean, there's probably a lot of underrated talent on Indiana's team, and obviously they have an all-star quarterback and a great receiver and a great back and a great defensive end and all that other stuff. But
I do think Indiana's talent it got to a place this year where it was worthy of the playoff, but it still wasn't like completely blowing you away.
No, I'm not trying to like undersell it from that perspective, but I mean, what they do is they execute over and over again. They put pressure on these teams to where they're going to be in the right spot and they're going to do the right things. They have a great play caller and a risk taker. I think those fourth down calls are from Cignetti and running it on 3rd and long and all those different things, just pressing all the right buttons. And then when they need to make a play, they trust their quarterback, to throw a back shoulder throw to Charlie Becker, and let him distribute the ball the way that he knows how to. So like that's all repeatable. And so I do think that should inspire hope in everybody out there. It's not easy, no, but that's what everybody's trying to get to. Maximize what you have. They maximize it every single play of every single game. And so that's the lesson with them, I think.
To your point about Indiana's talent, as you were talking there, I looked it up because I was curious. And I know other than Mendoza, there are some high NFL draft picks on that team, but the best player on the Indiana defense is Aiden Fisher, a linebacker who was a first-team All-American and a Butkus Award finalist, arguably the best defensive player, along with probably Caleb Downs of Ohio State in the Big Ten. And I was curious, like, what are people saying about him for the NFL draft? Because he doesn't jump off the page to me as someone who is probably a first rounder. And sure enough, here on this quick search I did, it labels him as a potential day 3 pick in the 2026 NFL draft. So Indiana is absolutely making the most of what it has. And that's just one example right there. There are plenty of other examples. So can Nebraska do that? And we discussed this, Connor, you and me and Mike Schaefer on your radio show Tuesday morning. What is it about Nebraska that's standing in the way of it repeating some of the things that have happened over the last 2 years at Indiana? And I theorized that maybe there's too many people in the way. Sometimes you feel at Nebraska like things can just be made too hard because they want it so bad, and there are so many different. I wouldn't call them impediments, but there's people to please. There's people who have jobs within the organization. There's so much. I mean, it's almost like the federal government, like bureaucracy, different levels that have to be achieved before you can get to the ultimate goal of winning football games. Where Indiana, there isn't that level of red tape and bureaucracy. They just came in and said, let's just focus on the things that need to be done to win. And I don't know if that's as easy of a thing to do at a school that has as much skin in the game as Nebraska and many others.
Yeah, I think there can be a burden of tradition. There can be a burden of all that other stuff that you're sort of referencing there. It's not an impediment. It doesn't stop them from doing it. I just think, like you said, it's something that I've always come back to with this particular staff is, are they focused on the right things? Are they, and I thought there was a definitive, sort of plan laid out right away and who they wanted to be and what they wanted to do. And they haven't been able to put that into action, and they haven't been able to achieve it. And I think it's changed a couple different times. And it seems sort of, you watch Indiana on the sideline, and I'm sort of, they always close cut Cignetti and his looks on his face and stuff like, yeah, he's always doing something crazy like that. But it's a quiet place. It is not a yell, like everybody's screaming at each other. It doesn't look frantic. Oftentimes you look at Nebraska's sideline and and it looks like there's just a lot going on. And that probably starts from the top. And there's a lesson to be learned there. And to be fair to Nebraska, every other program is like no other program has been able to achieve that sort of like one singularly focused like nirvana of like, I'm locked into this thing. And so whatever's that's the Cignetti magic dust that's over this entire thing that other coaches are trying to find.
I think there's plenty of coaches out there who have been at tradition-rich programs and would have said at one time or another, man, if I could just start this whole thing from scratch and not have any of the stuff around me and just do what I want to do on football, give me resources, give me the ability to get players, put me in a good conference, and just let me do my job. I think there's a lot of coaches out there who have said that and thought that in the past and probably been scoffed at. It's like, it's just an excuse. Like these things aren't actually holding you back. They're all going, look at Curt, look at what Curt did. I think many of them who probably resented Cignetti at times through the last 2 years as he climbed the ladder because they heard about it from their own fan bases and their own administrations about why can't you do what he's doing? Now they're going, no. Look at what he's doing and let me explain to you why it worked for him, because he didn't have to deal with a lot of the BS that other coaches in this business have to deal with. And that's just a reality of it. And there's another program out there in college sports. Go ahead before I get to that.
I think you could look at Cignetti a couple different ways. If you're another college football coach, you could say this guy screwed everything up for everybody, or
that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And
or look at him and look at what he's doing.
I think it's been an evolution. I think he's gone from part A to part B in a short period of time. And when next year starts, again, he might be right back to that guy that annoys everybody. But when he won the championship and raised the trophy, I think there's a lot of coaches out there that said, "Yep, man, if I could have only had what he had," and that's good revisionist thinking. That's not something they've been saying all along. All right, one program that doesn't have a lot of things bogging it down, doesn't have a lot of history or tradition or people necessarily who are living and dying on every play, is the Nebraska basketball team. And while Indiana finished the season at 16-0, the Nebraska basketball team heads into Wednesday night with the Washington Huskies in town at Pinnacle Bank Arena, 8 p.m. tip on Big Ten Network, at 18-0 and ranked number 7 in the country. So what can Nebraska basketball see from Indiana football? There have been comparisons made. There have been parallels drawn. What can these Huskers see from Indiana and take away?
Yeah, I mean, I see them. I think I look at Nebraska basketball and I see a singularly focused, team. And that's what Indiana is. You have to transport some things from football to basketball. But you see what happens when you get a team to play as a unit the way that Nebraska basketball does. And you see what happens when you get a team to play like that, the way that Indiana football did. And so the comparisons, I think, they're all right there. Not only the fact that Indiana's a basketball school and they won a title in football. Nebraska's a football school. They're shooting for the same thing in basketball. It doesn't stop there. The way they play is very similar. It's executing. Yeah. It's not loud. It is workmanlike, and they're relentless in it. And so there's a million things, but I see the parallels for sure.
On the surface, there's not a whole lot about Fred Hoiberg that I'd look at and say, yeah, that's Curt Cignetti. But if you want to look deeper, I think you can find some comparisons about the way that he keeps his team pointed in the right direction. There are possibilities. There are enticements for the Nebraska basketball players in this season to get distracted, to get their eyes off of the prize, to look in the wrong direction. There is going to be chatter. I saw on social media on Tuesday night that Andy Katz is going to be in town for the Wednesday night game. One of the college basketball national faces in media going to be in town for the game on Wednesday night. That, you have other national media members who are starting to circle around this team and try to get a piece of the excitement that Nebraska is drawing from its fan base and from college basketball fans. And there would be a temptation on the part of the Nebraska players, I think, to get caught up in that at some point. And Cignetti was a master, has been a master, is fantastic at keeping his team focused on what's going on right in front of him. And I think that is a parallel you can draw to Fred Hoiberg. I think Fred is taking that on his shoulders. Like bring that to him. Like he's been in the NBA. He's taken teams, his Iowa State teams, into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. That stuff doesn't need to come back on his players. Fred will gladly shoulder that for as long as he can. At some point, though, you're not going to be able to shelter the Nebraska basketball players from everything that's coming at them on a national level. And, that's where their experience has to come in. They're an old team,
Yep.
much like Indiana football.
Mm-hmm. I don't expect him to blink. I really don't, because I think there's a lot of confidence in Fred Hoiberg and his ability to navigate through that stuff, like you said, with his experience. So I don't think they'll blink. They might lose a game at some point, but they ain't gonna blink with the pressure. That's for sure.
Okay, let's come back after this break, and we will get to the subject of Mike Ekeler's departure from Nebraska and how it is nearly official, and what this should mean for the Huskers moving forward. That's next.
All right, welcome back. More of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. There was just a note here. There was supposed to be a press conference with Troy Dannon on Wednesday today to talk about the emerging sport of women's flag football that Nebraska will have a varsity program for in the spring of 2028. Troy Vincent, the NFL executive VP of football operations, he was supposed to be there. He's had some planes, trains, and automobile situations. Yeah. So he will not be making it. And so Dannon won't do the press conference. He'll go on the radio and talk a little bit more about that.
I picture Troy Vincent as John Candy walking down I-80 somewhere out in the open in Ohio. I don't know. So Dannon apparently didn't feel the need to do the press conference by himself. He was happy to share the stage with Troy Vincent. By the way, Troy Vincent Sr. Is the father of Troy Vincent Jr., who up until very recently was on Matt Rule's staff as in the recruiting and personnel department and has moved on. But Troy Vincent Sr. would be familiar with the Nebraska program because of the work of his son and that's another connection there that was bringing him to Lincoln for this. The NFL is involved in a partnership with the sport of women's flag football and is behind the effort to make this a mainstream sport. We'll have some involvement in bringing flag football as to the Olympics in Los Angeles in 2028. I believe they're playing men's and women's flag football at the Olympics in 2028, the 5-on-5 game that Nebraska is going to sponsor for women. The first, Nebraska being the first Power 4 conference school to do this. And that's what was bringing Vincent to town. Like you said, Connor, he's still going to do a radio interview with Dannon, but Dannon will not go to the podium by himself. I imagine if he had done that, there would have been a couple of questions about women's flag football, and then the subject would have turned to Nebraska football, tackle football, and probably some questions about Indiana, because Troy Dannon was on the college football playoff selection committee, and with the Hoosiers in the news this week, I don't know what kind of a spin Troy Dannon could have put on the rise of Indiana football and his perspective on it without some of those comments looking a certain way out of context about his own program that's struggling a bit right now.
True. That certainly would have happened. So maybe for the best there, I suppose. And
he's
so
going to
we'll
have
go
to talk at some point. He probably wants
Yeah.
to talk about basketball when he gets the opportunity to do that.
Yeah. We'll go to more of a controlled environment. So he may have even been asked about the departure of Mike Ekeler, which
Could have
is
been
happening. And now that it's final, is there any final thoughts, anything unsaid about this that we, haven't really covered yet?
Why did it not work? I mean, we've gone into various aspects of this over the last 3 or 4 shows, but maybe not everyone has heard all of what we've had to say. So let's just reset this a little bit. Like, why take it back? Like Mike Ekeler, this came out last week. Some reports out of USC that he was looking at a job on Lincoln Riley's staff, and I think at first, my first reaction was, I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock into that. I think, he's a hot coach. His name's going to come up, but why would he want to leave Nebraska? And then the reports didn't stop, and there were reports that it was getting close to being done. And then, of course, Matt Rule really threw fuel on the fire with 2 interviews that he did last week. One with Zach Gelb, a podcaster and radio host from the East Coast, and then another with Kyle Crooks on the Huskers radio network on Friday night, where Rule went from just saying, he needs to want to be here, to Rule then saying, if he has to go, he has to go, and nobody's bigger than the program, and special teams doesn't need to get all the glory, and special teams didn't do their job to win the game against Iowa. Whoa, burning bridges left and right, I suppose. And once that happened, there was just no way that like this thing was going to work out for Eck to come back for a second season at Nebraska. And I sit here today and just go like, how did we get to this point? Like, why did this crash and burn in the way that it did?
Yeah, and like we said, I mean, I imagine that Rule felt a little bit, he felt some type of way about putting the big contract extension in front of him, and him saying, maybe not. And I don't know why. That happened. But he didn't have to go there. I don't think, this could have been the reason why we're still talking about this today. Is a week-long story now, is because of what he said the other night on the radio about, all the things that you just mentioned. He could have said, yeah, we wish him the best, and we'll be okay. He said that, but he said a lot more things too. And I don't really think that needed to happen.
That's just Rule. I think a lot of times he plans out how it's going to go in the media setting, and he wasn't even getting asked questions necessarily. This wasn't, there weren't questions coming out of left field. Certainly not when you're talking on your own network. So to me, these were things that he wanted to say, that he planned to say, and I appreciate his transparency. I appreciate his openness. I always would rather have a coach, whether I'm covering that coach or just here as an observer of the sport, of the program, who's open about things. So it's rare is going to be the case where I say, I wish he wouldn't have gone there. It's puzzling to me. It makes me scratch my head and wonder why he chose to do that. If I was in his shoes, or if I was in the position within their athletic department to advise him, I would probably say, you ought to take the high road on this. And he didn't want to for whatever reason. And I'm not sure about that, but whatever, that's between him and Ekeler, and if they're going to air their dirty laundry, it's going to make things interesting around here. And that's always fine. We're going to see Nebraska now move forward and not make an external hire on this job. Rule's made it clear that he wants to put Josh Martin and Nick Humphrey and Brett Maher in charge of the special teams. And we'll find out about Humphrey and what his level of dedication, what his level of of loyalty is to the Nebraska program. He's been at Nebraska just 1 year and came with Mike Ekeler from Tennessee, so it wouldn't be a surprise at all to see him go to USC with Ekeler. But Nebraska might be offering him a big raise and more money than what USC would offer him. So an opportunity maybe for Humphrey to spread his wings a little bit and be somebody who is in charge of that group along with Martin. And obviously Maher's going to handle the kickers and the punters, and that's going to continue to be status quo. But it's an opportunity for these two young guys. We spent a lot of years assessing the Nebraska special teams under Scott Frost and saying, just hire a coordinator, get somebody to run the thing. Don't make it a by committee. Like, don't use your outside linebackers, coach. You need to pay attention to that side of that part of the game. And, it never really got to that point, and Rule came in and he immediately did it. And it wasn't the right fit. It wasn't the right hire to have Ed Foley in that spot for 2 seasons. And he finally found his guy with Mike Ekeler and had success. And now they're kind of back to square one.
Yeah. Most people, I think, just look at this from a football perspective and say, like, say whatever about, all that stuff. But I just want the special teams to be good. I just want them to stay good. Yeah. And so that's the challenge for those guys now, taking over the unit that, improved drastically and was one of the, SP Plus, I think, had them in the top 15 in the country in special teams, coming off of years where they were in the hundreds.
It doesn't have to be about Mike Ekeler. Like, Nebraska can be good on special teams without Mike Ekeler. He's not the only reason that they did it last year. He just showed them how, and we'll see if they remember without him in town.
Yeah. But the thing is, you better be that good again. Like, that's right. That's kind of the dice.
It's a strike against Matt Rule. It's the only way to look at it.
Right. All right. That will do it for us today. Just a note here. We'll probably release the Thursday show just a little bit later, probably afternoonish.
Okay.
Yeah. Somewhere around there. Just working around some scheduling stuff. So stay tuned for that on Thursday. And then we're back with our regular mailbag show on Friday. Appreciate you guys listening to us and making Locked On Nebraska your first listen. For your second listen, you can check out Locked On College Football. I'm sure plenty of reaction to the national championship game and the portal and all the things in between. We appreciate you listening today, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.